Curse of the Moor, the Vast Library. The massive library of Attalus' grand university reeked of dust and ancient parchment. Reagan Trit sat in a cozy, lantern-lit corner, poring over a book that looked like it had survived more than a few apocalypses. His finger traced over ornate symbols and runes that few in the world could decipher, and then he read it. In the heart of the curse, a fragment of the accursed lies. The fen, imbued with its hate, offers the shard a home. The script was half-scraped, barely legible, a mere footnote easily missed. But Reagan had always possessed a keen eye for the inconspicuous, and for the forbidden. For weeks he had scoured the salvaged remnants of the library swallowed by the Duskmoor. This particular tome contained prophecies eerily close to what had ultimately transpired there. Reagan's investigations were viewed with concern by the university professors. They wished to avoid the kind of attention that research into cursed artifacts attracted. The Church of Harmony, Attalus' dominant world religion, deemed such inquiries heretical, and crossing the church was ill-advised for anyone. But above all, the cultists of Mysore, the god of hate himself, were the ones whose attention had to be avoided at all costs. If Reagan pursued this, he would be alone. Yet, he couldn't resist. If a fragment of hate truly lay hidden in the fen, it had to be secured. It absolutely could not fall into the hands of the cultists. He gathered his belongings, some provisions, his rune-emblazoned robe, a dagger, and the few scrolls of focus magic he had crafted himself. Before the first light of dawn, Reagan was gone. No farewell, just an empty bedchamber and a missing book. The edge of the moor. The small town of Varel, on the edge of the Duskmoor, was a grey, bleak place. The land was perpetually wet and boggy, the air thick with mosquitoes. Even the horses looked sickly. No one lived here by choice, only those with nowhere else to go. Reagan sought to avoid drawing attention. He entered a grimy tavern, the Last Hemp, and settled into a corner. After a sniff, he dismissed any thought of tasting the drink the innkeeper brought. He was there to observe, to learn how the locals spoke of and lived with the Moor. But first, she caught his eye. A slender woman sat in a corner by the fireplace. Her skin was dark, and violet eyes glowed from the shadows that the fire should have dispelled. She was by far the smallest person in the tavern, packed with grim figures, yet no one dared approach her. No wonder, given the cold arrogance she exuded. Still, like all things mysterious, she exerted a strange pull on Reagan. But before he could consider speaking to her, a tall man with a scarred face pulled up a chair at his table. He glared darkly at Reagan, then spoke. "You want to go into the Duskmoor, fool? Even more foolish, you want to do it alone." Reagan carefully assessed the scarred man. He wore no visible weapons, but his posture was unmistakably that of an experienced fighter, relaxed and confident, yet always ready to react. Reagan tried to hide his tension. "Oh, really? And who are you to know so much about it?" "I'm just a mercenary who coincidentally also needs to enter the Duskmoor. And you look like you might have read through enough to be useful." Reagan hesitated. This man could certainly help him, not only because he was clearly a fighter, but also because he seemed to know something about the Moor. Yet, "Why should I trust you?" he asked. "Because we share the same goal." "And that would be?" "The curse in the middle of the moor. Something has infiltrated my comrades among the paladins, and I know it came from there." Reagan's eyes widened. The Golden Paladins were part of the legendary Gold Shadow Legion, mighty warriors blessed by the gods, who had dedicated their lives to fighting demons. Just as Reagan was about to respond, a pleasant, almost husky female voice whispered directly into his ear. You should be quieter in this area when speaking of such things. Reagan and Tyrum spun around. The shadow elf stood there, having approached Reagan silently within inches. Even Tyrum hadn't noticed her. Noctis's shadow also guides me into the moor, and it shall be at your side, she whispered into Reagan's ear. I am Nisari. The choice of companions had apparently been taken out of Reagan's hands. They set out at dawn, leaving their horses in the tavern stable, as they would only hinder them in the swamp. Tyrum walked beside Reagan, relaxed yet watchful. Behind them, so subtly that one might forget her presence if not paying attention, walked the dark elf. Dark elves are very different from us, Tyrum whispered, which surprised Reagan, as he felt he had little in common with the tall, scarred paladin either. But I'm sure she's on our side here. Reagan agreed. Dark elves served Noctis, the god of darkness. Though Noctis possessed an unsettling quality, he was a sworn enemy of Mysore, making his followers allies. As the day progressed, the ground grew softer, and their pace slowed. On the horizon, the ominous mists of the moor were already visible. The next day they reached the heart of the fen. The fog was thick, visibly poor. The companions spoke little, burdened by the constant feeling that something might emerge from the mist. The mud made every step a struggle. The Ancient Fortress. On their second day in the moor, they encountered ruins, decaying towers and half-sunken walls, the remnants of an ancient fortress. Hoping for a dry resting place, they entered. In the center of the fortress stood a massive, rune-decorated cage. Reagan recognized the runes. It was a banishing circle. The cage was broken, the runes on one side shattered. "This is an old gold shadow stronghold," Taram said grimly. "We seal demons in these cages that we can't easily kill. We should move on. Quickly." But it was too late. A deep growl shook the ground. Tyrum drew his sword. Nisari had already vanished into the shadows. A sound, not loud but heavy, as if something enormous was pushing through water and roots. Reagan looked up, and he saw it. A skull overgrown with lichen, horns of black resin, eyes swirling with red light like a maelstrom. The creature slowly rose from the swamp like a nightmare. A demon hound, long decayed, ravaged by swamp gas and dark magic. A relic from the war, never truly destroyed, only banished. The demon charged, too fast for its mass. Tyrum lunged aside, striking in midair, hitting a shoulder bone. The creature stumbled, but remained on its feet. Nisari appeared like a shadow from nowhere, her daggers flashing as she sliced through a tendon in its leg. It shrieked, a sound of bile and hate, and thrashed blindly. As it regained its footing, the wounds inflicted by the two had already healed. Reagan heard Tyrum curse behind him as he scrambled back, rummaging in his pack for a scroll. It merely produced a force blast, but a powerful one. He held his dagger directly in front of the scroll. "Try to hold still for a moment," Reagan shouted to his companions. Tyrum and Nisari didn't need to be told twice. This time, Nisari simultaneously slashed two of the creature's legs with her daggers, causing the massive body to wobble and finally topple. Tyrum seized this opportunity, thrusting his sword through the creature's neck into the ground, pinning it. "Now!" Tyrum yelled, and Reagan activated the scroll. The force blast, designed to clear heavy equipment or boulders when applied to the small dagger, accelerated it to an extreme. There were two loud cracks. First, as the dagger broke the sound barrier. Then, as it shattered against a wall behind the beast. The monster lay still, a smoking hole in its skull. The dagger had flown straight through its head. Tyrum whistled, impressed. "Not bad," he said approvingly, while Nisari wiped her daggers clean on the carcass. "What was that?" Reagan asked. "Good question," Tyrum replied. Certainly not a normal hellhound. The Moor's curse infects even Miser's own creatures, Nisari spoke up, startling Reagan as she rarely spoke. Her voice was clear, though whispered. Whatever unleashed this calamity, she continued, gesturing towards the swamp, must have been incredibly powerful. If a simple hellhound is this dangerous here, we'll encounter far worse, Tyrum said grimly. We should keep moving. The Temple of Azrael. The next few hours of their journey were even more vigilant than before. After a while, they saw a tall, pitch-black wall before them. It was perfectly preserved, unlike all other remnants of buildings they had seen so far. They passed through the grand gate. It was a temple, ancient yet untouched by time. "What is this?" Tyrum asked. "A temple of Mysore?" "No," Reagan replied. "It's older, from before the First War, before the demons. It doesn't belong here." "It's a temple of death," Nisari stated. Azrael, the archangel of death, had sacrificed himself in the war against Mysore to imprison the god of hate. Azrael's essence, the essence of death, was what held the god captive. Temples of Azrael hadn't existed for millennia, or so it was thought. At the center of the temple complex was an obsidian circle. "This seems to be the center of the Duskmoor, although the catastrophe didn't break out here back then," Reagan said. Nisari looked at him. "What do you know about the curse?" Reagan hesitated. The fact that a part of Mysore was in this swamp was a secret for good reason. "Not much, but I think someone tried to free Mysore back then. That obviously didn't succeed, but presumably they summoned a part of his essence. However, something seems to have gone wrong, which would explain what was wrong with the Hellhound. I think this temple is here because of that. Azrael's essence also found and imprisoned this part of Mysore." "So, a piece of Mysore himself is right here with us?" Tyrum asked. "Presumably, but I don't think we can do anything here. If Azrael himself protects the shard, then we are hardly needed." "I wouldn't be so sure," Nisari countered. "The shadow led us here. There must be a reason. We should look around more." They searched the temple. In the main hall, a massive altar stood beneath a statue of Azrael. Someone lay half on the altar, as if having suddenly collapsed. "Dead," Nisari pronounced after a brief examination. The deceased's hand was clenched around a lever hidden behind the offering bowl on the altar. "Operating a hidden lever in the Temple of Death is obviously not a good idea," Tyrum remarked. "The question is, what does the lever do?" Reagan said. "Let's find out," Nisari said, and before Tyrum or Reagan could stop her, she pulled the lever. With a loud grinding and rumbling, the altar slid aside, revealing a massive staircase leading down into the darkness. "The shadow of Azrael's father led us here, so Azrael will hardly harm us," Nisari said, with a disdainful glance at Tyrum and Reagan's shocked figures. "I suspect the one here was sacrificed. We will certainly meet someone down there." "I've found enough reasons in my life not to blindly trust the gods," Tyrum muttered, shaking his head, and followed Nisari down the stairs close behind Reagan. At the foot of the stairs was a long, dark corridor, its walls adorned with runes, and in wall niches stood statues of Azrael, hands raised in supplication. "I think we are getting closer to why we are here," Nisari whispered. As they crept further, the air grew heavier. Something evil lay ahead. Further down the corridor, a reddish flicker was visible. As they approached, they heard voices. "The seals weaken. Centuries of bondage have not broken him. His hate still lives, imprisoned in this shard. Do you feel it? The cold in your bones? That is his breath." The voice was full of reverence, but clearly accustomed to giving orders. "Lord, how long until we can release it?" This voice was much softer and clearly subservient. "Not release. Unleash. We're not breaking a lock. We're tearing a breach in the very order of this world," the leader replied. "Those are cultists of hate. They want to free the shard," Reagan whispered. The companions crept forward to peek into the chamber. It was large and expansive. In the middle of the room, a dark red pulsating crystal floated, held aloft by black energy currents. At the 4 points where the bonds connected to the walls stood the cultists, clad in dark red, having painted several blood-red rune circles on the floor, one around each bond. The cultists standing before them swayed as if in a trance, muttering to themselves. Starting from the circles, dark red cracks slowly began to spread through the bonds. The cultists they had heard speaking stood directly in front of them. There were 3 of them. One wore the robes of a high priest and held a dark artifact in his hand, the cataclysm of a high priest of hate. The 3rd cultist now spoke with a trembling voice. But what if he is too strong? What if the shard awakens and devours us all?" The high priest barely raised his voice, but it became sharp. "Then let it devour us. We are not here to survive. We are the vessel, the first, his servants. Our flesh is dust compared to the return of his voice." A low rumble began, barely audible, but deeply felt in the chest, like a distant growl beneath the earth. Then the high priest spoke again, softly, almost ecstatically. "Do you hear it? He feels us. The shard pulses. The barrier wavers. Soon, the ritual is almost finished." The confrontation. "That's enough. We attack," Nisari hissed, lunging forward. She struck the high priest first, a prime target, for the magic of these cultists was dangerous, and their high priests were among the most powerful. But they didn't see Nisari coming, and stood no chance. The 3 cultists fell almost simultaneously. Taram almost charged forward now, and together with Nisari, he slaughtered all the cultists. It happened quickly. The cultists offered little resistance in the trance the ritual had put them in, yet this seemed to cause no hesitation in Taram and Nisari. After the ritual was so brutally ended, the cracks in the bonds stopped spreading, but they receded very slowly. Just as Reagan began to relax, he heard a murmur behind him. The high priest, barely alive, bleeding heavily on the ground, whispered something and pointed at Miser's bound shard. "Stop him!" Reagan cried frantically. "He's summoning something!" Immediately, one of Nisari's daggers sank into the cultist's forehead, and he finally ceased to breathe. But it was already too late. Dark smoke, laced with dark red lighting, swirled in the chamber, forming a massive, vaguely human-shaped figure. Akra Ragul, a demon. Nisari and Taram took defensive stances, but the demon ignored them, following its master's last command, and hammered at the seal. The cracks in the bonds rapidly spread further. Reagan's thoughts raced as Taram and Nisari tried to stop the demon with blows from their weapons, which it barely seemed to notice. Reagan mentally reviewed the scrolls in his pouch. A scroll for marking a path, useless. A scroll for opening doors, also useless. A scroll for absorbing air. That might work. Reagan grabbed the scroll and threw it at the demon's head. He missed. Nisari reacted quickly, caught the scroll in midair, and with a powerful leap, slammed it into the back of the demon's head. The runes glowed, and the demon's head was sucked into the scroll. Without its head, the demon's body dissolved. The threat seemed averted, but the scroll was not designed to absorb the monstrous magical power of the creature. It began to glow and tremble. "Look out!" Taram yelled just as the scroll exploded. When Reagan regained consciousness and scrambled to his feet, Taram was already kneeling over Nisari. She had been standing directly next to the scroll and had apparently been thrown against the wall by the explosion. "She's dead," Taram simply said as Reagan limped over to him. After a long pause, Reagan said, "The cultists are defeated, and the seal is safe. She fulfilled her master's will." "Indeed she did, my child," a pleasant voice whispered behind them. Reagan flinched and spun around. Behind him stood an unremarkable man with dark skin and dark clothes. There was nothing special about him, and no power emanated from him. Yet Reagan instinctively felt he was in the presence of something ancient. "My son will take her, and she will receive a place of honor among her ancestors." Now Reagan knew who stood before him. The father of death. The creator of Atalis. Noctis, the god of darkness. Immediately, Reagan fell to his knees and touched the ground with his forehead. A slight thud behind him told him Taram had done the same. Noctis did not acknowledge this. "I am also grateful for your service. My blessings will be with you, and my priests will recognize you. But I can do no more for you. The ancient pact still prevents me from directly entering the fight with Mysore," the god said in his soft, pleasant voice. "But I can ease your way out of the Moor." Noctis snapped his fingers, and Reagan found himself back at a table in the tavern in Varel. Beside him sat Taram, who also seemed astonished by the new surroundings. On the table before them stood a full mug of cold beer next to a plate of warm venison, and in the center of the table lay a coin with Noctis's black sun imprinted upon it.